everybody. Welcome in. It's Matt Camp. This is the Wrestling Mat. Right? You knew that, right? That's what it is. What's going on? It's the WrestlingMatShow.com. You know where to find everything we do. If you're joining us for the first time, welcome in. It is Friday. It is time for the AEW All Out preview kind of prediction show. I'm going to just talk about the card. As you want to talk about it, I will say no chat access today, so any questions you may have, I will certainly see them at some point, but always leave the comments down below and join down there at thewrestlingmatshow.com. A lot more coming for members. As we announced on yesterday's show, we will be doing a full review of the Mr. McMahon Netflix documentary for Matt campers and Matt eventers that is coming when the show hits, which I believe is in about 3 weeks or so. But that is for another time. Plenty of reasons for you to subscribe. Check it all out right here. Here's our memberships right above Todd, Matt Camper, and the Matt Event level, as I said, for that Netflix Mr. McMahon documentary reviews that we're going to be going over, my personal anecdotes. You'll get that at the Matt Camper and Matt Event levels. As you see there, the members-only videos that get you there. But you can get in at just $2.99 per month. Right there for you. A lot more coming out for you. As we said last week, to end August, we had our 30-minute private Zoom. We've connected with so many of you on social media by following, which we're going to do from Wrestling Mat 23 and the Matt Camp. We're going to have those quarterly specials. You name it, private past wrestling watch-alongs. You know what we did last week? We watched Raw from Berlin. Raw from Berlin last week, leading into WrestleMania 13, and, of course, leading to Bash at Berlin. And by the way, we watched Bash in Berlin right here for Matt Event level members. If you weren't there, part of it, want to be part of our watch-alongs for Raw, SmackDown, Dynamite, whatever it may be, you can do so at thewrestlingmatshow.com. Go watch past episodes. Went into detail yesterday about Swerve and Hangman, where Moxley stands, where Okada stands after 6 months in AEW. Earlier this week, I talked about how blood can make a return, which it may have already, to WWE if used properly. The bolstering of the announcer roster in WWE with the addition of Joe Tessitore, who had not a perfect, and he would tell you the same as he did, but an excellent debut on Monday Night Raw, clearly getting what it means to fill that role. And my goodness, coming from a fandom background and a great broadcasting background goes a long way. We talked all about that. We've also talked this week, which you can go back and check out at thewrestlingmatshow.com. We talked about where it stands right now between NXT and TNA, what NXT is going to look like when it debuts in the CW. Not as much those first two shows with Punk and Orton in Chicago and St. Louis, but what happens after that? How much does the show change, if at all? All of that is covered and so much more at thewrestlingmatshow.com. Please make sure you are following us on social media at WrestlingMat23 on Twitter and Instagram. And also, if you're listening on podcast form on the Believe Network, thank you. And if you go, wait a minute, this is a podcast? Yes, as of last week, I talked to Believe. They wanted the Wrestling Mat. That's because of the interest from all of you. We appreciate that support. This show is now available in podcast form. You can watch it, listen to it however you want, but get those podcasts right now. Subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. Please leave a review, rate, review, subscribe. All those things very much helps us. Your support goes a long way. So do that, please, for the podcast. And if you are listening on the podcast, thank you very much. Thanks for joining the newest way to take in the Wrestling Mat. But we have so much more to offer here on the YouTube page, and you can see me. You can see what's going on. You can see the fact that I've added this Mario question block next to me and all the random stuff that is sitting next to me. And by the way, you can join the live chat when we're up at 1 Eastern each and every weekday. So if you're just listening on the podcast, thank you. But come on over to thewrestlingmatshow.com, explore what we have. So much more that you may have missed since the podcast feed has only been up for a couple weeks. But all of that is available to all of you because of your support for making that happen over on the podcast and thewrestlingmatshow.com. Which leads us to the All Out preview. 2 weeks ago, AEW had a pay-per-view, a very good one, in fact. One that I think was, I don't want to say universally because it's never that way, but certainly seemed like a very, very strong reaction in a positive way to All In Wembley. So we come back 2 weeks later. Here we are. Where are we going? We are not going to Wembley anymore. No. There we're at Saturday night. AEW All Out. Now, as we know, or maybe you don't know, last year they ran these back-to-back weeks. Not easy to do. Not really conducive to booking because it's tough because you can't look past the pay-per-view, but you also can't wait to book the pay-per-view. So they had the extra week built in, and I believe Tony Khan mentioned that it would have been this past weekend for All In, but because of Taylor Swift or whatever, well, like they moved it a week or whatever it was, they helped her get into Wembley or run her shows with how they schedule things. So we have the week buffer, which I think was helpful, and I think they booked accordingly with that. Still, you got to rush to some things. The only thing we knew about All Out, I guess, was that Pac would be challenging the winner of MJF and Ospreay at All In. So that when that match was done, we knew, hey, we're getting Pac and Ospreay for the International Championship at All Out. But other than that, you know, as we'll get into some of these matches, some of the groundwork was laid. I mean, we'll start with this one because this one probably has the most groundwork laid of anything right here. MJF against Daniel Garcia. I mean, this is a story that goes back even before All In. You know, MJF still kind of in that baby face, although it was clearly a ruse, that baby face run of his since he had come back, kind of riding out the pop, which makes sense. You know, initially I was like, why is he back as a baby face? I don't want to see him as a baby face. But it was just, that tends to happen. A popular, well-known star coming back from injury, you know, for the most part is always going to get a pop upon his or her return. And that's what happened with MJF, and they let that kind of play out. And then, of course, you got the big turn on Garcia. Hey, use this ring. Nope, I don't want it. All right, you're not going to listen to me. I'm going to try and break your neck. And, of course, that leads to Garcia coming back at All In and getting involved in the match with Ospreay, and eventually Ospreay winning, MJF losing, and MJF not happy, calling out Garcia, getting attacked on that first Dynamite after All In. And now it's got some good heat behind it. All things considered, we didn't know what this match was happening 2 weeks ago, and now we do, but the story, because of the lack of tunnel vision, because MJF has mentioned, hey, I'm still looking at that AEW World Championship. He did this stuff with Garcia before Will. It was building towards him and Will at All In, but Garcia still had an axe to grind. Garcia was still pissed off. And now something that happened leading into All In is going to happen at All Out, and there's actual story other than 2 weeks. And some of these matches, they don't have a lot of build. They have some build, some have more than others, but this is a match that has a solid build. I don't see MJF losing 2 pay-per-views in a row in the span of less than 2 weeks. He could. As we saw in Dynamite, he had the upper hand. I think we have learned at this point in time to not go, well, if he had the upper hand, the other guy's winning. No, I don't think you can't do that. I don't think Garcia needs to win this one. I said something on Twitter after Ospreay beat MJF. When you beat someone like MJF, who is leaning in and is the character that I think is the most valuable to AEW. He is a top-line heel, not looking for cheers, lies through his teeth, makes you want to hate him, nothing redeeming about him, takes personal shots, acts above everyone else, has already discarded, being Mr. America because it didn't work out for him, and he crapped on America other than where he lives. He uses what he needs to. He uses who he needs to. He uses, whatever he needs to get his point across, even if he's lying. Oh, Ospreay was easy work after I took 59 minutes and 59 seconds to defeat him. That's what a good heel does. He's someone who should be throwing roadblocks in the way of baby faces. He does that. He should cheat. He does that. It should be a big deal. when you finally conquer MJF. It's going to help make people. I think it put Ospreay on a level, not that he wasn't there yet, but Ospreay's got that now. He beat the man who held the AEW championship longer than anybody else. He beat him. He beat him on their biggest show of the year. He beat him. It led to more things with MJF and Garcia, but he beat him. You want to see MJF lose. MJF is exactly the kind of person and the kind of character heel, top-level heel, that if you're going to try to elevate Daniel Garcia, okay. And you got to be consistent with it. And that's happened. We've seen that with Garcia. Something big happens and no, there's no follow-up. Or it looks like he's rubbing up against the right people. No follow-up. Doesn't go anywhere. He has been consistently booked now for about a month and a half. That's not very long. Believe me, I get that. But what I like is, you know his story. You know who he is. You know what he's done in AEW. And that's good. But now he's moving on to bigger and better things. I like that his Tron changed. I like that he's not dancing anymore. I think I said that yesterday. Did that help him for a time? Sure, but that's not what this feud is, and that's not what this version of Daniel Garcia should be. This is a maturing Daniel Garcia, an evolving Daniel Garcia, one that I know a lot of people see a lot in. Listen, I think MJF has a certain amount of sway there, and I think he's certainly good with this match happening. I think he should beat Garcia, and I think they can get more out of this, and whether it was MJF and Ospreay, whether it's going to be Mercedes and Shida, rematches should be embraced when used correctly. AEW hasn't done a ton of that. Willow and Stat is another one. And there's a lot of rematches on this show. It's just in terms of like what's happened before. We'll get to Hangman and Swerve. Obviously, that's a rematch. It goes back. Mercedes and Shida was, a month ago. Willow and Stat is, it's happened before multiple times. It's just building. If the storyline is there to keep them going, get 2 out of it. Get 3 out of it. Get a year out of it. And sometimes it doesn't. And there's going to be matches we talk about on this card that don't have that same kind of build, and therefore might be one and dones. But I just brought this up, so let's talk about this one. Mercedes Mone, Hikaru Shida. On paper, very good match on paper, as it was. They had about a 10.5-minute match on Dynamite a few weeks back, about a month ago. You see that Camille, not that you can read it, man, that, I got to say, one little knock here as I'm trying to read it myself. That font is barely legible. Like where it says under TBS Championship, Camille barred from ringside, that ain't easy to read. And I know I'm not the youngest guy anymore, but that's the kind of stuff that's got to be cleaned up. Anyway, nitpick at the time. But this is very much, hey, we want to get Mercedes on this pay-per-view because she's a draw, we think, and obviously she has a big fan base that way. She's the TBS champion. We're not going to have Mariah May on this show, at least as we record this right now. Doesn't look like it. How do we get her on the show? We'll have a 4-way on Collision, which is very good. Shida wins. Shida Mercedes 2. And as Christopher Daniels noted on Wednesday night on Dynamite, Camille, in only her second appearance on pay-per-view with Mercedes, is banned. So they're already going to that. But she is banned. Maybe it's just to give Mercedes a, clean, obvious victory over Shida, and she could still cheat or do whatever, but that might be part of it. It's a good match on paper. It doesn't have a ton of build. I think they've done a decent job with, the cards they've been dealt of 2 weeks between pay-per-views. Shida, under the suit showed off she's the ace. And she is the ace. Nobody's more accomplished in the AEW women's division and then on that roster than Hikaru Shida. So Mercedes should have to get through her. I don't think she's going to lose. I think that's one of those where, all right, Mercedes is going to keep it going. Here's my question. And I've seen the speculation. At the same time, it's only been a couple of weeks. Man, they have wiped away that Britt Baker match from All In. They haven't shown clips of it. They haven't talked about it really. I don't know what that means. You know, Mercedes put out in her newsletter or blog or whatever that thing is she does, she indicated that, you know, she certainly wasn't head over heels about that match. And she kind of indicated, you know, if you read between the lines, it sounded like she didn't agree with some of the decisions and structure of the match as it was laid out to her via agent, producer, whatever you want to call it, and kind of said, you know, I would have done something differently. That was not the caliber of match that I think Mercedes expects to have. And I don't think it's the caliber of pay-per-view match that you are used to from her. Take all the character stuff away and her obnoxiousness, and which is part of it. I get that. She gets in there, she works. Like, of the last 10 years, just in terms of what she does in the ring, she's one of the best. And at her best, she's excellent. She sells unbelievably well. And her great matches stand out. She didn't have one of those at Wembley. I don't think anybody's going to try and say anything other than that. It wasn't awful, but I don't think it was at her standard. I think my expectation will go back to being high because of who she's working this weekend on Saturday with Shida. Tomorrow night, they're going to have a pretty damn good match. And I want to bring the other women into play here because I think there might be some connection. Because we get this. Yet another rematch of a story that is built. I don't think it's super hot, but it's been consistently booked. I think we feel like we see Willow or Chris on TV all the time on a weekly basis. And it's a Chicago street fight based on the fact that Willow and Ishii defeated Chris and Stokely a couple weeks ago at All In. Willow, I like the callback to the idea of, hey, nobody's been in more street fights than me in AEW, in the women's division. She is correct. These two have pretty good chemistry. They know each other well. They came up together. That is all very apparent. Stokely is a great shit stirrer. Street fight allows him to get involved. Maybe allows him to take some bumps, although he got whooped pretty bad by Ishii last week. What do you do? Yes, Willow's the CMLL Women's Champion. That's not on the line. That's kind of outside of canon, kind of. And where she could win, or I should say she could lose, and that's not going to change anything in CMLL. I look at the landscape and say, well, this is the biggest feud going right now in the women's division, because it is. Because Mariah and Tony seem to be done, at least for now. And Mariah's not on this pay-per-view, at least as of right now. Willow and Stat, talking about former champions. Both have had championships in AEW, multiple championships. So you think theoretically the winner of this feud would be in line, and the winner of this match, which I think would win the feud, would be in line for some kind of championship match. But then you look at who's got the titles. A heel Mercedes Mone, a heel Mariah May. Not that AEW is against doing a heel-heel match, but I think Willow winning the feud makes sense because you can get her into a story with Mercedes again. Probably not, but more likely with Mariah May. And I think that's a pretty good feud. Mariah doesn't have that obvious challenger right now. The winner of this match, which I think will be Willow, could give you that next feud from Mariah, who had her first title defense against Nyla, which they went there with it instead of putting it on the pay-per-view. Not a lot of time to build. Okay, don't force her on the card. And who knows if Tony comes back. She's been, doing the media tour in Australia. But I think it's a good spot for Willow to win to set up something bigger. Here's one of the matches on the show that has just fallen victim to the timing of the pay-per-views. I didn't necessarily expect. I don't know about that date stuff with the Young Bucks and certain dates or only a certain amount of dates or whatever it is. They obviously made reference to it on their social media because that's what they do. But they're back 2 weeks after taking out the Acclaimed and FTR, who we really haven't heard from. And they're in there against Blackpool Combat Club, only set up on Wednesday night. Claudio making the challenge. I like collecting gold. I like collecting trophies. I won the Grand Prix. I won this. I won that. I won another championship. So let's go with this. Good match on paper, not a lot of story to it. And so, yeah, if they don't face off on Wednesday, are they setting up this match? Obviously, one led to the other. And you also have Jack Perry taking on BRYAN DANIELSON. So, on paper, it's a good match. I still come back to, where does the Blackpool Combat Club stand in terms of their membership? It's Yuta, it's Claudio, it's right there. It says it. It says Blackpool Combat there for Danielson celebration, and Mox just out of the group. Does he get involved in this at all? Probably not. I don't know. But they haven't filled in that gap of what they are as it relates to Mox. And this match doesn't have a ton of story. They happen to have a match on, the other night, or they called out the Bucks because of the match against the conglomeration. And all right, gets the Bucks on the show as the tag titles. I think they keep them. I don't think this is the pair to beat them. I don't know who that pair is right now. It doesn't feel like anybody's getting really built up. But this is one of those that just falls victim to the fact that there's not a lot of time to build it up. And without this match, it's a 7-match card. Not a bad thing. 8's good, too. 8's not a huge number. But this could have been left off, and it's a 7-match show. But it's not the case. You get a good match on paper. I want to see where it builds off of that. Because obviously part of this tied in is, Pac's tied up with Ospreay, as we know. We'll get into that now. They're tied up already, so you can't defend the trios titles. All right, well, we'll get them in the tag ranks. That's fine. Pac and Ospreay. It's a rematch, but not with an AEW. It's a hell of a match on paper. As I said, the fact that the challenge was made before All In said, okay, we're either getting Pac and MJF or Pac and Ospreay. It's what I figured would happen, and this is the match we're getting. Unreal match on paper. Other than the spectacle of Swerve and Hangman, I think this steals the show. I think people would expect it to steal the show. I think these two guys are two of the very best to do it, just in terms of straight up in ring. Ospreay now starting his second reign. There is a little bit of what this show looks like it's hard to see title changes on this show. Maybe Blackpool Combat Club beat the Bucks, but Danielson just won. Jack Perry's not ending his career. I don't think Mercedes Moné is already going to lose the TBS title. I don't think Will Ospreay is going to lose the international title after he just won it back. We'll get to Okada in a second. It doesn't feel like there's a lot of threat to the gold on this card. If you're okay with that, then you'll very much enjoy Will Ospreay and Pac. But I don't think Will Ospreay's losing. We're going to get a hell of a match. It's going to bolster that resume. I like angrier heel Pac, even though it seemed like, he was out at the biggest babyface celebration in company history at the end of the pay-per-view. But he focuses back up. The Poison Rana, as I said yesterday, I like the brainbuster spot they did with Will, because now he's dropped him on his head twice. But don't do 2 brainbuster spots in another match when Okada takes them both, wins the match, and then comes out for another angle and fights people off. And not in the ring. He took them on the apron and on the guardrail. Stiff spots. 2 brainbusters. Beat his opponent, came out later. Nobody seemed concerned about him. Will Ospreay gets a brainbuster on the boxes, which are also very dangerous. And everybody's worried. They all should be worried. But all the focus on that spot should have been on that spot. So maybe I could see them, that's the story. Will's neck. God, Will's neck should be a story for the rest of his career. Has been for years. The intensity in which Pac wrestles is so apparent. And I think it's a great thing for Will Ospreay to play off of. I thought Will and Roddy had that great match, when he won the international title right before the month before Forbidden Door. I guess that was Double or Nothing, right? Great mix of styles. You might look and go, well, Pac can get up in the air and do stuff, and so can Will. But there's much more of a physicality to Pac's game, much like Will has added more. So I think it's still some similar styles, but a good mix of styles on top of that. That makes for a really good match. All right. One we don't know a lot about, only announced on Wednesday. Continental Championship, Fatal 4-Way. Here's what we know. Okada's wrestling on a pay-per-view. Who are filling those spots? Well, Collision, because of the pay-per-view happening on Saturday, is going to air on Friday night, from 8 to 10 before Rampage. They will determine these 3 spots by these 3 matches. Orange Cassidy against Brian Keith, which they built a little bit with the interaction backstage. Takeshita and the Beast Mortos, which is an unbelievable clash of styles on paper. And Mark Briscoe versus Lance Archer, and we've just seen Lance Archer do his thing of beating people up. I assume to heat him up for this matchup. Pretty wide open. I mean, you can't go all baby faces. I would have to guess it's Orange, Takeshita. See, I would go Lance Archer because I think it's interesting. And I think Mark Briscoe can eat a loss. But if you go Orange and Briscoe, you got faction mates in the same match. Takeshita, I guess, still technically a heel. I'm going to make one tiny complaint if it's Takeshita, which it should be. I don't want him and Okada to do much. I want that saved. That's a big match. And I know I did kind of the 6-month state of the union there on Okada and AEW yesterday and said, we haven't seen the big match Okada. He hasn't been presented that way. He's been more comedic. But, man, you want to get him back on track, and I know Kenny is, there's that match waiting for us. But I think that Okada and Takeshita is a huge match. Huge match. Like main event Tokyo Dome level match. I know that match right now would be super over in Japan. I don't know if you could say that, on the western side of the world. Just because of, if you don't know who Okada is before 6 months ago, if your opinion is based on the last 6 months, I don't think he has come across or been presented, and this seems to be a choice, as, main event of the best matches. His best matches are some of the best stuff you've seen over the last decade. I don't think he's been presented that way. On paper, him and Takeshita, is going to hit those levels, And I would harken back to the battles with Kenny or Ishii or Naito or Tanahashi or anything like that. I know Okada still has it in him. I just don't think he, other than the Pac match, which is easily his best match in AEW, he's only had 16 matches. He's only had a handful of singles matches. But I think handled correctly, Takeshita kind of brings it out of Okada. So that's why I don't want to see them do too much if Takeshita, which he should, ends up in this match. I want a tease. I want a moment that is clear, like a very intentional moment. They have done this before in other matches where it's multi-man matches, and you always wondered if these two guys faced off and you give them that moment. I remember AJ and Shinsuke and Money in the Bank. It happens in the Royal Rumble at times. They did it, with Warrior and Hogan. They teased it, right? At the Royal Rumble 90. And it led to the WrestleMania match. Just give me that moment of Okada on one side and Takeshita on the other, and they've dispatched the other two opponents, and here they are. And that crowd will eat that up. Or at least that's a good litmus test. When they see those two, I want to see the crowd reaction. Because it also could be telling of how either man is perceived. Takeshita has not been pushed at the level I think he works at. It was great to see him have a nice run of the G1. It was great to see AEW promote that. It was great to see him, have his moment over the weekend in the four-way. That's got to continue. And like I said, the AEW fan base knows who Okada is and knows who he can be. Can we see that, though? And I think you give them that no touch, just that moment of it's just those two. And maybe they just trade forearms, and then maybe it gets broken up and we don't get any more of it. I think it's just a tease. I don't want to see them do too much. I don't think Okada's losing. But I don't think you put Takeshita in the finish. Okada pins Orange. That's fine. Also, I'd love to see a lot of Okada and Orange Cassidy. I mean, that's fun too. Lance Archer and Takeshita. Let's see what that, I'd love to look at that on a big pay-per-view setting. There's something that, like, for a match that was kind of just thrown on there, and I have said, like, Okada still has that presence to me. It's like, he's got to be on all the pay-per-views. He's Okada. But there is ways to get a lot out of this match that's not just contained to this match. And that's why I come back to that Okada-Takeshita opportunity I think that they have. All right, so we've hit a couple more left, right? All right, let's go here because I don't think it's the main event. I don't. BRYAN Danielson, first championship defense since continuing his career with the win at All In. And as I said, I like the fact that this is, arguably the number 2 champion in the company with the TNT title, Jack Perry. I think it's fair to say that the international title is past, at least in terms of perception. But it's right up there. And the number 2-ish, 2A, 2B champion should be in the mix to challenge for the world title. I think too often in wrestling that hasn't happened. Like, you keep the singles wrestlers away from each other. I think more so as of late. That used to be more of a thing. And I know, you think like, the international title is a workhorse title or whatever you want to be. The TNT title has been held by a lot of, great wrestlers in AEW and has pretty good prestige that way. Darby had it. I associate Darby with the TNT title, and I mean that in a very positive way. And Jack defended it against him after winning that ladder match and looked like Darby might get it back. And no, Jack keeps it. And he's made it his own. Him and Danielson's a solid match. And people were like, I can't believe they're doing that. Like, Danielson's not losing this. That's the thing. I will say, I think that doesn't feel like the same kind of urgency is there. Whether they really haven't made it clear or whatever. It's, he kind of insinuated, I'm staying here until I don't have this anymore. It doesn't feel like that title reign is in jeopardy. I would throw the house at Danielson and get some of those near falls, and maybe it leads to more. Maybe it leads to him and Okada again. I mean, they've done that a couple times, but they did it at Wrestle Kingdom, and they had another great one. But, you know, the other part is Darby. Does Darby come back? And then that ties to Moxley, as I talked about a lot yesterday. Darby's got the Grand Slam title shot because he won Royal Rampage last month. He's got it. He's sitting on it. Is he wrestling Jack Perry for that world title? Is he wrestling Bryan Danielson for that world title? I think it's the latter. And I also think it's okay that this match doesn't main event. And I know almost every time, even when there's been big stuff going on that is not doesn't have the world championship involved, the world champion has main evented. I don't think it happens on this show, and I think it's okay. It's not a long build. It's not like there's been this, big story between Jack Perry and Bryan Danielson. That's fine. If they go on past that, sure. The next time it main events the next pay-per-view, whatever it may be, which is Wrestle Dream, which is probably going to be Danielson anyway. But the main event of the show is very obvious. You can't sell a match any harder than they did on Wednesday. There's no doubt it's the strongest thing they've ever done, and just in terms of an angle. Not a match, not a promo face. I mean, like something big. They've used cars or, parking lot brawls, and Big Show getting thrown off the car, all that. They've done that. This was the biggest spectacle of pro wrestling that they have put on. The most vivid imagery. And very much, like I said, it's pro wrestling. One guy lit another guy's house on fire, and people predicted it in the morning. Not because it's real, because it's very pro wrestling. And I think that term has been lost to sports entertainment when sports entertainment stems from what pro wrestling is. It is theatrics. It is big personalities. It is big characters. It is stories that are supposed to be real, but they happen within inside the world of pro wrestling. AEW is not going to do superhuman powers or things like that. That's why Matt Hardy didn't connect when he showed up in AEW doing the broken mat stuff when he was flying around the arena. It's like, that's not what they do. It doesn't fit. They're very more reality-based. Well, you could still tell stories within that. Swerve went to Hangman's house. Swerve went back to Hangman's house to watch Hangman take his wife to the hospital. You couldn't incense Hangman anymore. His family was threatened. But nothing he had done up to this point was all that crazy. Yeah, he hit Uno. Okay, sure. All right, he was a little more physical than he needed to be in some of his matches. Yeah, he's beat people up backstage. Yeah, he's picked fights with Jay Lethal or Jeff Jarrett. Still pretty basic pro wrestling stuff. Everything he's done has been at a show, a fight. The stuff at Blood and Guts. He beat up Swerve a bunch and was going to just bounce. They still got a moment out of it. But all still around fighting, around wrestling. There was still a big window of, yeah, I agree with Hangman. He's right. That window closed a lot on Wednesday. That's a big spectacle to put on. They burned a house down for an angle, and it worked. It worked. Like Randy Orton burning up, Bray, Sister Abigail. Like, that looked cool. It didn't hype people up. And then they had an unfortunate match at WrestleMania with all the extra bells and whistles. It also was like still within the supernatural world, because that's what Bray was still at that point. Had that mystique about him. This is a movie. And I'm not like cinema, like that gets completely overused, but like this is personal. It's a wrestling story. And it allows people to suspend their disbelief of one man burning another man's house down and not getting arrested for it. And it's okay because that's pro wrestling. They fight. That's very much encapsulated in their own world. It could be very real, and that is not a real thing. You don't get to burn somebody's house down and then go wrestle them on pay-per-view with the authorities not showing up. That's fine. That's pro wrestling. I don't know if I told the story here or on my Bleacher Report stream yesterday, but like Jerry Lawler, and it popped up recently on Twitter. Jerry Lawler in an angle got hit with a car outside of like a TV that they did in Memphis. And people called emergency services, the police, because they were worried about it, to the point that he had to go on their television on the same day and be like, hey, I'm okay. I'm going to get my retribution. Like, that's how real people took it. I don't think anybody was calling the authorities on Hangman last night. I think everybody enjoyed what was one hell of a way to close out the go-home show for the most personal, heated feud in AEW. And it's right up there, if not higher, than what's going on with Punk and Drew McIntyre, which is awesome, by the way, to have two feuds that have gotten to that level. At the same time in pro wrestling, these feuds don't happen every year. And they shouldn't. You can't get to this level all the time. It takes away if you water it down and too many people do it. They're there. I don't know where they're going to go with this, because I think you got to get back to Swerve and Danielson for the world title at Wrestle Dream. I think you do. Unless they want to stretch it out longer. Now it's lights out, so it's not sanctioned, but they pulled the rankings off the website, and they pulled the records off the website. So I don't know how much that stuff means anymore, but that used to mean, hey, we're not sanctioning this. It doesn't work towards your record. This is just to settle this thing because it needs to be done between you two. This is not about a title. This is not about, where this puts you in the company or what title you're then in line for or standing. No, we're giving you a ring and a cage. End it, please. That's what they're saying by saying it's a lights out match. It's not sanctioned. They want it to be over. Here are the tools to end it. Our hands are clean. I lean Hangman because of that. Who makes the mistake? You could also say it's Swerve, because Hangman is too filled with rage. That's the beauty of it. And I would never end this feud. They can get away from each other. But at no point in time, it's one of those, I said it with Drew and Punk, anytime Swerve and Hangman come across each other for the rest of their careers, it is on sight. It should be. I think they had a pay-per-view buying angle. And I don't say that about much stuff anymore. I think they got people, I would expect, and I don't think it'll do as well as All In. I think that angle is going to get people to pay for that pay-per-view. I think that angle will be the primary and for some reason the only reason to get that pay-per-view. And once again, I think it's a good card, but I think the angle was that strong and it's, you know what? I'm happy I get all this other stuff. It's bonus to me. That's how good this build is. I am paying my money to see this match. We know what they've done in the past. Where do they go from here? We'll talk about it more at thewrestlingmatchshow.com. Please become a member. Consider it. Starts at just $2.99 a month. You could join down there. You can go to thewrestlingmatchshow.com. you can check out the membership page. If you're listening on the Believe Network, thank you very much. Thank you for listening to the podcast. Please subscribe, rate, and review if you haven't done that yet with the podcast. And if you've just heard it on the podcast, hey, come on over to thewrestlingmatchshow.com. There's a lot more here. Past episodes, clips, videos, membership perks, just adding that much more to what you only hear on the podcast. And if you haven't checked out the podcast yet, please rate, review, and subscribe. Go check it out where you get your podcasts. I'll be back on Monday to talk about wrestling even more. See you Monday right back here at thewrestlingmatchshow.com.